Police officers of Reddit, what was your they could have gotten away with it if they had kept their mouth shut moment? Former cop here. We always had a statement that we used if we ever got in trouble, and it applies to anyone. No poly. No waiver. No statement. Basically, never consent to take a polygraph. Never waive your rights and never make a statement. You may think you're doing yourself a favor by answering questions and trying to be helpful, but more often than not you'll end up digging your own grave. Be polite about it, but respectfully refuse anything until you've spoken to a lawyer. Not me, but my dad. My dad was in an army helicopter unit assigned to local police to search for marijuana plants being grown in the rural parts of my state in the 1980s. One day, they found a decently sized gaggle of marijuana plants located just off the property of a farm. They landed the helicopter on the farm and talked to the farmer, asking him if he knew that someone was growing weed on near his property. The farmer got scared and immediately confessed that they were his plants. He was arrested by the police. Oddly enough, if the farmer would have played dumb, the army and the police were just going to remove the weed and leave. No, a police officer. But I do know of this house in my local village that was a notorious drug den. The police came to search the place but couldn't find anything. As they were leaving, the lovely owner yelled at them that they should have brought the drug dogs. So yeah, they came back a few days later with the drug sniffing dogs and found huge amounts of drugs hidden away. Absolute morons. He wouldn't have gotten away with it. But a patron of the bar that my sister worked at many years ago was stopped by the troopers while driving along next to the highway. In the ditch. His explanation: "Officer, I'm way too drunk to be on the road." Not a cop but a witness. During college, my friends and I would hang out outside and smoke hookah. Frequently we would invite strangers who passed by to join, or campus police would casually chat with us as they made their rounds. So one time a group of freshmen walked past and asked to join. After about 15 minutes the campus police car rolls up and the freshmen get visibly nervous. We tell them calm down. The cops are chill. As soon as the cop gets out of the car, one freshman bolts and makes it about 20 feet before the cop tackles him. We all clap and heckle the kid. Upon searching him, the cop finds a bunch of weed up. Then he says, "You realize prior to running, I had no reason to be suspicious. I just wanted to talk to my friends over there," and points at us. The cop ends up writing a ticket and sends him off. A cousin of a friend of mine travels around the state to take in deadbeat dads. Gets to one place. A 4-year-old kid is home. Dad isn't. So the cop starts talking to the kid, making sure he's okay and such. After a bit of this, kid says to cop, "Want to see my dad's secret garden?" Takes him to a closet with a false bag. Opens it up to see a small pot farm. Guy gets home to a few cop cars and a few chargers. I'm a nice guy, and I enjoy a chat. You'd be surprised how much this lowers someone's guard. Stood in full uniform, people will just start telling you things that could get them in trouble. Multiple times I had to tell people to shut up. It was usually petty things like where they hid their weed stash, that they'd got a bifter in their pocket for later. Not really worth the time and effort to deal with how skeezed we were. One time a guy really got himself in trouble by effectively telling me he had stolen property on him. I had to act on that one. Okay, so we had a DUI accident where a guy kept driving straight into the woods into a tree because his GPS was predicting a future street. He walked back to his hotel room and left his check-in papers in the car. So we go to the hotel and go to his room and knock on the door. He did not have to answer, but he did. He was pretty clearly drunk. I asked him if he had anything to drink since the accident. He did not have to answer, or he could have told us that he drank after the accident. He said, "No, I haven't had anything to drink since the accident. And where I'm from you have 24 hours to report a property damage only accident. So it wasn't even a hit and run." So as I'm locking the guy up, he tells me he's a lawyer. I told him I hope you're not a defense attorney. But in his defense, he was drunk. Not a cop. I had a roommate in college that was no friend of mine. He got in a fight at a bar and was kicked out. He tried to go back into the bar and got thrown out again. But a cop happened to be driving by the second time. Cop told him to relax or he was going to be arrested. He told the cop to arrest him. Cop handcuffs him and puts him in the back of the cop car. Roommate then started banging on the window. Cop then recuffed him with his hands behind his back. Roommate's stupidity carried on for the next couple months. He was supposed to go to court over the whole thing, but didn't show up. Police showed up at his job, cuffed him and brought him to court. Judge told him he would have just received a slap on the wrist, but he now had to send him to jail for a couple days. He was scheduled to report to jail a week or two later, and he didn't show up for that either. By this time, he disappeared. I never saw the guy again. Absolutely never admit to any crime without a lawyer present. Just because you know you did it and the cops know you did it doesn't mean it'll hold up in court or that they'll think it's worth the time to prosecute it. You don't need them to think you're a good guy who made an understandable mistake. You need to stay out of a cage. Keep your mouth shut. The only word you should be saying is lawyer. Currently watching Live PD. And the guy told the officer I have caffeine pills in my back pocket, gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. Dude then comes clean and says it's Molly and the officers look at each other and go, do we even have a test kit for that? Other officer says no. Dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. Edit, spelling and grammar. I had a car pass me once. Passenger hangs the upper half of his body out of the passenger side window with his middle finger in the air while screaming, "Duck the police." He had my attention for the seatbelt violation. I got behind the car and ran the registration. Registration is suspended. Registered owner's driver's license is attached to the registration and his license is suspended. Registered owner also has 2 warrants for retail theft. I stopped the car, and they both started with the free speech thing and how I can't stop them for giving me the finger or swearing. Which is 100% correct when I pointed out that I can, however, stop them for the passenger not wearing a seatbelt and for the registration violation. Suddenly they got quiet. Driver got arrested for suspended license and his warrants, and the passenger got himself a citation. The driver's vehicle got impounded. Moral of the story? Tell your passengers to shut their mouths. Had that guy not been a moron, his buddy would have been homeward bound. Not a cop but pretty applicable to the thread. When I was in high school I liked to park in parking spots that cars had parked poorly next to just as a duck you. One time I was at a high school football game and a Jeep had parked like shit. He was nearly halfway into the spot next to him and parked at an angle. I was driving a 98 feet Chevy Silverado, big old pickup truck, at the time, and I had my brother help guide me into the spot so I was perfectly in the lines. That made it so the driver door was completely impossible to get in. I took a picture for the novelty of it and went on my way. When I got back to my car the Jeep was gone and every panel on the passenger side of my car was keyed. There was an officer nearby so I told him about it and showed him the picture. He told me there's not a lot they could do because there were no witnesses, but he'd give it a shot. He looked up their license plate, called them and asked them if they had done it. They confessed and ended up having to pay $1,600 in restitution along with getting a felony. Edit, grammar. Edit 2. Thank you for the silver and all of the support. This is my first award on Reddit. Not a cop but have a buddy that is. Nothing too crazy, but he's had countless moments where he's tried to give people a break or all they had to do was sit down and be quiet, but they end up talking themselves into jail. Recently had a dude he pulled over that was a bit over the limit but not too much, so he was gonna let a friend pick him up instead of arresting him. Guy got to talking and basically revealed driving under the influence was something he did fairly regularly. A single mistake is one thing, but my buddy decided the best chance at getting him to stop would be learning this lesson the hard way. Not a police officer, but my mom once managed to talk her way into a lesser fine for a traffic offense, but wasn't satisfied with that, so managed to sass her way right back into the full fine. Sigh. Not a cop either. Friend was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt while he was with a few buddies. Gets handed his ticket. Guy in the back seat says, "Am I gonna get a ticket too?" Officer replies, "Well, were you wearing your seatbelt?" UHH. "No." "Alright. Can I see your ID?" Not the brightest fella about. Not me. But my boyfriend. BF's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing 35 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour. BF pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out and snaps the glove box closed super fast. BF laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says, "You know, registration, insurance." Whispers, "Little bit of weed up," and whisper. BF. "What?" Guy coughs and says, "Registration, insurance, and up. A little bit of weed up." BF laughs again and says, "Seriously? Can I see?" Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. I pulled over a strange looking dude in a lab coat and he went off about some plan to poison a bunch of rubber plants so people had to buy his synthetic brand tires or something like that. You pulled over a supervillain. Keep tabs on him. He'll be making headlines in a few years. Not a cop, but a public defender. Had a client who made a long statement that didn't help her case. But the judge was letting her go without setting bail before leaving the courtroom. However, I was informed that police from another precinct were coming to pick her up and she'd be held until they did. They didn't get her until much later. But I told her to absolutely not say anything to them. To keep her mouth shut. The next day I go to do her arraignment and I get the notice of any statements. Which started with my lawyer told me not to say anything. But this is what happened. Admitted to a variety of crimes. It was frustrating to say the least. So this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling with my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly, we get an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed. Seconds later we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side. We ended up courting him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspect, I asked the suspect if he had had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said, "I have never been there. Ask the ginger lady." Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy, covering up for her ill daughter, whom would had never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. A friend told me a story about when he and his teenage friends had a shitty garage band. They were jamming one night and some family member gets into it with her boyfriend in the house. Cops were called. They stopped playing and go outside to watch. A cop walked over to them to find out who they were. One kid straight up admitted that he had been drinking that night. Because that wasn't what the cops were there for and he didn't see anyone drinking. He said he didn't care. The kid took that as permission. Walked into the garage and walked back out with his beer. Now the cop cared enough to take him to jail. Not a policeman. But I saw one on TV once. My brother was at a house party getting hammered while not yet 21. Cops show up for a noise complaint. And his dumbass stands up and shouts, "Welp. You caught me." Not a police officer, but there was a motorbike robbery in my town and the criminal would have gotten away with it, but he filmed himself doing it. Even turning the camera to himself. Full face view. No disguise or anything. He got caught straight away. From what I know, as this took place a few years ago, he sent it to his friend, reportedly to look cool or something IDK, who snitched on him. He became forever known as the town's dumbest criminal. And he would have gotten away with it if he kept his mouth shut. I was the one that might have gotten away with it. But the cop pulled me over and says, "I clocked you going 86. Actually, I was going 85. I had the cruise control on. Comma. Yeah. That's still over the posted speed limit of 75 miles per hour. Oh. Yeah, I guess it is. I know what I'm about, son. Don't try to tell me I was going faster."